New to the travel ban causing a reaction on financial markets. Let's have a look at what happens in currency markets, the pound against the US dollar. And what you can see, if you look here, is you can see the pound was getting stronger last week. That's what hopes of a Brexit deal there. But then over the course of the weekend and into today, it fell quite sharply, actually by about 3 cents at the low point, although it started to bounce back since then. Why is that? It's because people are starting to look at the UK economy, working out how much UK trade could be affected by this. And we can do that exercise ourselves. Have a look at the totality of UK goods trade. This shows you just in freight units, this is the way they measure that, how much trade goes between the UK and the rest of the world. And what we can do is break it down into the way that that trade gets out of the country and comes into the country. You've got two different ways that it does that. So you've got container trade, so coming in containers, that's about 43%. And then you've got what's called roll-on, roll-off. That's basically goods in lorries going into ferries. And you can see that's the majority. And how much of that might well be affected? Well, let's look at Dover in particular, because it's that Dover-Calais route that might well be the epicentre for this. About 17% in total of total UK goods trade could well be affected. A significant amount, although it's worth saying, that's actually come down recently. If we look specifically at food trade between the UK and France, you can see it's started to drift down. This is the proportion of food trade that's going to France out of the EU. There is a point, though, that at various winters, it does tend to peak. So the question is whether this is a bad time of year for it to be happening. If you look back last year, there was a peak there in December, but it's not always in the winter time that it does peak. So you can see in March, it's peaked there. In June, it peaked in 2017. And there are points where it's in the December, but it's not a given that this is the very worst time of year for this to happen. That being said, it is worth just taking a step back and asking this big question about food security. To what extent is the UK reliant on the rest of the world for its food supply? Well, this chart kind of tells you that story. The higher this is, the more of our food we source domestically. And you can see, actually, since the 1950s, it's gone up. It's higher now than it was back in the 50s and the 60s, but it has fallen a bit since the 1980s. This chart, a big part of that story, both about what's going on with COVID-19 and these restrictions, but also about Brexit. How much do we rely on the rest of the world for our food?